Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm Yasmine from Acroseed Immigration Lawyer's Office, and today I'll be giving a very quick crack course on permanent residence. Well, permanent residence, as the name suggests, is a resident status that allows foreigners to live in Japan permanently. However, it can mean so much more. When I was handing a card, a new permanent residency card to a client, they expressed relief that after working in different countries for so many years, he finally feels the security to start and build his life in Japan.
Thank you. Is that good?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Should I start from the beginning?
You can. From there is fine.
Okay. So permanent residency can mean different things to different people. Another client, after receiving permanent residency, was able to obtain a loan, a home loan, at a more affordable interest rate for his family. It can be a milestone, it can be a natural progression, it can be freedom to work and to live at your full potential. Acroseed has been in the immigration industry for more than 30 years, and we have been helping foreigners and their employers in immigration applications. There are an array of residency statuses, and I'm thrilled today to explain some of the common methods in applying for permanent residency and also the pitfalls that can happen. Foreign residents in Japan have quite a number of obligations to comply, and the information is not always readily available. Today, I'm going to go through some of these common pitfalls that, regardless of whether permanent residency is something you're thinking about or planning now, some of the avoiding these pitfalls um, can help you in having a smoother stay, I would say, in Japan. To start, I would like to clarify a few common terminology issues. We often use the word visa when we are really referring to resident status. Visa is more like the sticker in the passport for new entry into Japan. It is governed by the overseas embassy, whereas resident status is the card that governs the length of stay and the activity that the foreigner can engage to. And as many of you will probably be familiar already, there are an array of resident status. Student for those who are studying, dependent for those who are working, who is a spouse or child, depending on a working professional. Instructor for those who are working at a school as an English teacher or some other teaching profession. And then there is what is a catch-all for a number of company positions. And the status is the engineer, specialist in humanities, and international services. This is one of the most common resident status held by those working in Japan. Now, foreigner resident statuses are dictated by the activity they wish to do in Japan. So if you want to do activities that's outside of the original status, additional permission is needed from immigration. From our experience, we often see a confusion between what is relevant. For example, a corporate conversation school and eikaiwa might call their teachers instructor, when in fact the correct resident status applicable is the engineer specialist in humanities and international services. An instructor's status is only relevant to the people who are working within a school established under the relevant education law. So just to clarify this. There's also sometimes a bit of a confusion between permanent residence and naturalization. Permanent residence, you keep your own, your original nationality. You are still a foreigner resident. You still have your residence card, your value card, which is required for renewal every 7 years. And you can go live in your home country and live in Japan. Whereas naturalization is when you become Japanese citizen, you renounce your original citizenship, and the application is examined by a completely separate organization, and it is examined by the Ministry of Justice, which is a different process to the permanent residency process. Okay, so now that we have the basic differences explained, I would like to move on to our main topic of the day and give you some overarching principles that govern application for permanent residence. Now, when immigration examines permanent residence, there are 3 overarching principles. Whether it is in the interest of Japan, and whether the applicant's behavior is good, and whether the applicant has sufficient assets or skills to make an independent living. For those people who are dependent on their spouse or family, or perhaps is a baby who came into the world by permanent resident parents, then some of these do not apply. But these are the 3 overarching principles that govern the immigration assessment, and the risk factors linked to these principles. But as you can gather from these principles, it's a little bit vague. It's not very clear what do these mean. And as such, immigration has the discretion to set up more specific rules and policies that they can change depending on societal needs. So it is not rare for immigration to change their policies or change the required documents that they ask. And we have seen many cases this year where immigration has become a bit more strict with what they would like from applicants. One of the things that happen is people who will look on YouTube or look at blogs written many, many years ago and feel that those rules are still relevant. However, that can be a bit dangerous because the rules can definitely change, and we always recommend that you seek the most relevant information at the time that you plan to make your application. So I'll give you a quick roadmap. So the first one is the common methods. Each person's situation is a bit different, and given the time today, I'm not able to go through too much detail, but I will give you some of the most common methods, and then go through the common risk factors, and then the frequently asked questions and some of the recent trends in immigration. So as part of the common methods, there are 2 different groups. We have work-related statuses, and then there are those who are resident-related statuses. The first part are relevant to those people who are working professionals themselves. They are working, they have their own independence. And then the second group are those who are dependent on their spouse or their family. Um, as a general rule, regardless of which method you want to try to apply, the period granted on your current residence card must be at least 3 years. So if you're currently holding only a 1-year residence period, then the first thing you need to think about is, okay, how can I improve my situation so the next time I renew, immigration will gain me a longer term, that is at least 3 years or 5 years. So the first method, what I will call the more traditional method, is the 10 years in Japan. These are the people who have been in Japan consecutively for at least 10 years and working for the last 5 years. Of course, they need to be of good behavior and have sufficient assets or skills. So 10 years in Japan, it doesn't mean that you live in Japan without ever going out of Japan for 10 years. It simply means you have held Japanese residency for the last 10 years without any break. You can, of course, go on a 2-month holiday or a 1-month holiday here and there, but it is not for those people who may have worked for 3 years in Japan and then worked for another company overseas for a few years, came back and gained a new Japanese residency. Every time you come back on a new residency, you start counting from that new job. The second one is the highly skilled professional points method. This is a shortcut to the 10 years requirement. It can be applied directly from other work statuses without holding this particular status already. In order to apply, there is a point sheet published by the Immigration Office. And according to the points, if you have at least 70 points 3 years ago and at least 70 points now, you can apply. Alternatively, if you score at least 80 points now and at least 80 points 1 year ago, you can also apply. So compared to the people who have been in Japan for at least 10 years, this is a very advantageous method because it really means that if you score high enough, it is possible that you can gain permanent residency even with just being in Japan for one year or 3 years. And so for those who are interested in the highly skilled professional point method, the Immigration Service Agency of Japan has a dedicated website that provides you with further information of how the point system works. I don't have enough time to go through each of the criteria, but basically you get points for your educational level, your career experience, your salary, your age, and whether you completed higher education in Japan, as well as academic or patent publications. Your university ranking is also something that can give you extra points, as well as your Japanese ability. So for those who are on the borderline of achieving these thresholds, learning Japanese can be a good way to quickly boost your point. There are a lot of different factors involved. So if you are interested, please scan the QR code and you can do some research and contact our firm in the future. Okay, so now I'm moving on to those who are dependent. The spouse or child of Japanese national and also the spouse or child of permanent resident, they can apply for permanent residency as long as they have been living with their family for at least a certain amount of period. For a spouse, it is married and living together for at least 3 years, of which 1 is in Japan. and for a child, at least 1 year in Japan. And of course, they also need to be of good behavior and stability. And that includes their spouse or their parent. When immigration examines people for these kind of methods, their supporter will be examined, because they are dependent on their supporter. However, these criteria is slightly different if the supporter gained the permanent residency through the highly skilled professional point method, because the highly skilled professional point method is already a shortcut to the traditional 10 years method. So immigration is not as open with allowing their spouse and children to gain permanent residency too quickly. So for those who gained highly skilled professional, gained their status through the highly skilled professional method, their spouse and child need to have been in Japan for at least 3 years. Some of this kind of criteria, you don't have to hold these particular statuses. I have had clients who are on a working visa, but married to a Japanese national, and they have been married for at least 3 years, and they have been in Japan, with a stable livelihood, good record, and there was no problem for the client to apply for permanent residency as a spouse, even though holding a work visa. So it is actual and not the resident status. For the dependent status holders, the dependents are people who are married to a foreigner who is currently on a work status. So if their supporter is eligible for applying for permanent residence, as a dependent, they can kind of tag along with their supporter. And if their supporter is eligible and can gain permanent residency, then they too can also receive permanent residency. Of course, some of the requirements I mentioned before, they need to be cleared as well. They need to be married for at least 3 years, and they need to be living in Japan for at least 3 years. Okay, so now I would like to move on to some of the risk factors, because even if you can clear the eligibility requirements for applying, if you have a number of risk factors, then it is not likely immigration would deem you to be someone of good character or stability. One of the first one is financial stability. For a working professional, if you are earning less than 3 million yen a year, that can be a big risk factor. Even though it is possible to renew your work visa with a lower annual income, for the purpose of permanent residency, anything below 3 million can be rejected and is likely to be rejected. And the next one, well, crime and traffic violations. Because one of the main criteria is the applicant needs to be someone of good character. If you have a criminal history or even traffic violations, that is a risk factor in itself. Of course, this would depend on the severity of the offense, whether you were sentenced or whether it was just a simple fine. However, this is a risk factor that anybody who drives should be very careful of. You can be denied simply because you have a number of speeding tickets or you made the wrong turn accidentally. And then we have a number of potential issues that relates to Article 22, Paragraph 4 of the immigration law, and that refers to revocation of status of residence. So in the immigration law, there are situations where immigration can revoke your status of residency. The list is quite long, but in a nutshell, there are 3 situations. The first one is falsifying information in applications. If you gained your status using false information, that is a big problem, and if it's discovered, there is a risk of you being kicked out. The second one is not conducting the activities that the status is granted for, or performing activities outside of the status scope. For those on work statuses, it is 3 months. This is situations, for example, a student on a student visa ends up working and not studying, and working over the part-time limit that the student status allows them to. It also applies to dependents or people who say they are married, but in fact, they are living separately from each other, or they are in the process of divorce. So in that kind of situation, there are more accurate status of residence that's applicable. And for the purpose of permanent residency, if you're doing activities that you are really not allowed to do, and immigration discovers that, it will seriously undermine your application. Quite often, people are worried about their residency in between jobs. However, there are ways of telling immigration that you're job hunting, you're job searching, and to notify them of what you're doing without, and giving them a good reason. So, if that's the case, don't be afraid to ask immigration, what is the best thing to do, and to let them know that you are doing your best to find a new job and to maintain your status. The third one is falsifying address or failing to update the address within 19 days. This is quite a big one because for foreigners, we really need to update our address within 14 days every time we move. Failure to do that can cause problems in the future. Another big one is non-enrollment in health insurance and pension. Now, in Japan, there are 2 types, at least 2 types, I should say, but mainly 2 types of health and pension. Most of the time, your company will be helping you with these matters, but for students and those who are working as contractors, these are your own personal responsibility. A common issue we see is that a person came to Japan as a company employee, everything has been organized by the company, but for some reason they decide to resign. But after their resignation, instead of joining the national health insurance and the national pension, they never do that. And they end up having this gap of empty record that becomes noticeable when they end up wanting to apply for permanent residency. Every time you have a job change, unless it is completely sequential, connected without any break, even if you only have a gap of 1 or 2 months, it is very important that after you resign, you go and enroll yourself in these health insurance and pension so that your record is continuous with no gap. If you're in financial difficulties, then of course there are ways to ask for exemptions or deductions so that you are enrolled, but you don't need to pay for the full amount. Another one that can be problematic is incorrect record for residence tax and income declaration. One of the most important documents that immigration looks at is the residence tax certificates. And for many renewal applications, that is also a mandatory document for doing renewal. So you can see how important they can be. The residence tax amount is based on your income. So if the income is too low when you're meant to be working, then that is a red flag, because it shows that, oh, have you actually didn't work when you were meant to be, or have you actually didn't declare the income that you should have? For the people who are employed by a company and are full-time company employees, that is not really an issue, because everything is done through the company. But for the people who are contractors or holding several different jobs, then it can be a problem if you do not declare your incomes accurately. The income declarations are due around March every year. So it is something that you can all start preparing once, if it's applicable to you. If the income amount is too high, then that can also be a red flag, because because if it doesn't match your employment, then there's also a bit of a question immigration might ask about what other activities and income streams you might be having that they don't know about. And the next one is late payments in resident tax, health insurance, and pension. Immigration not only cares about whether you have paid, but also whether they have been paid on time. And this is directly linked with the principle of whether you're someone of good character. If you're consistently late in paying your fees, or you're consistently late in enrolling yourself in these obligated insurances, then immigration can deny your application, feeling that you're not really adhering to the rules of Japan. I highly recommend that if you ever need to pay these type of invoices yourself, to keep all your invoices and receipts, because you don't know whether they can be needed in the future. Even when everything is done through your company, but because of some tax deduction for overseas dependent, and you end up needing to pay for certain residence tax yourself, it is best to keep all the records, because I've had cases where immigration asks that. They ask, oh, we know that you have been working at this company, so everything should be done through the company. Why did you need to pay for this amount of resident tax yourself? What was it for? They can ask these questions, and if you don't have a good explanation, then it can cause an issue for your application. And then this one is called the Article 19.6 notifications. Recently immigration has been quite strict with these notifications. As a foreign resident, whenever you change company, whenever you have a job change, you're obligated to notify immigration within 14 days that you have ended a contract or when you have signed a new contract. It also includes other things, like if your company has changed name, and also if your company has changed location, it is up to you as an individual to submit the relevant form to immigration. The change of address is done through the ward office automatically. So as long as you go to the ward office or the city office to update your residence card, that is fine. But what we often see is that people seriously just don't know about the need to update their affiliated organizations. In particularly this year, after doing renewal for our clients, immigration will attach a letter saying, we notice that you haven't done these notifications, please do them. So we see a trend that immigration is taking these notifications seriously, and if you don't do these, it is quite likely the term of your next renewal may be the same or would not be upgraded to the next level. You know, we're seeing clients who is holding 1 year term, and after the renewal, it's still a 1 year term. Or those who are 3 years term, after they renew, it's still 3 years, instead of other people moving up to the 5-year term. So, you know, it is not difficult. There is a multilingual website by immigration. So I really recommend that you look into it to know what you need to do. Another risk factor for permanent residency is overseas for too long or residency broken. So this is applicable to the eligibility I kind of explained earlier on. You know, for those going for the 10 years in Japan method or the highly skilled professional method, if you were overseas for too long, like there's no like clear line, but we say anything over 3 months is a big risk factor. You need to explain why you were overseas for that long. And also if your residency is broken. You know, if you lose your resident status, you will lose your resident status if you're being overseas for over 1 year without obtaining a re-entry permit in advance. So with COVID especially, we had clients who were stuck overseas for more than a year, and because they haven't applied for these re-entry permits before their departure, they actually lost their residency status, and they have to come back using a new COE. Okay. So now that I've gone through the kind of common risk factors and all the obligations that you should be careful of, I would like to now talk a bit about the frequently asked questions. One thing we get asked a lot is about the highly skilled professional, because it is quite new. It has been, you know, the points chart can change and expanded. First of all is how do I prove the career points? Well, you need letters from your previous employers. So you always ask for experience letters before you resign or right after you resign. If you're unable to contact your past employers, then it becomes impossible for you to prove your experience. Imagine trying to contact a company you worked for 5 years ago, how uncomfortable and difficult that would be. The company could be bankrupt. They might not have the same company structure anymore. So whenever you change job, I recommend that you ask for an experience letter that specifies your employment period as well as what job you were actually doing. Things like offer letter that were issued when you first started the job are sometimes not accepted by immigration, because after you join the company, there's nothing to certify that you have been really working the job that's in your offer letter. You can only prove that after you have left the company. And the second question is about the timing. What does it mean? 70 points 3 years ago, or 80 points 1 year ago. So let's say you're aiming to apply January next year. The 1 year ago will be January this year, because that is 1 year ago from the application. And likewise, for the 3 years ago, it will be 2020, January. And if you have job changes during the period, then that can be a bit of a problem, because everything that you use to establish your application will need to be regathered and reapplied. So, job changes while the permanent residency is in process can be problematic. So we usually recommend that you only apply after you have been settled in your company. Okay, and with all the risk factors, it can seem very overwhelming, and some are worried about, okay, what if I get a failure result from immigration? Well, a failure is not the end all. It doesn't mean that you lose the chance of ever applying for permanent residency. It just means that this particular application, you don't meet the immigration requirement. So you can go and ask for the reason and reapply if you understand what can be fixed. Our company often help applicants who have applied permanent residency themselves but got a rejection and don't know why. And we accompany them to immigration to ask for how we can, make the next application better. Currently, the length of examination is about 4 months to about six or 7 months. It really depends on, immigration situation and, of course, how many people are in the application. Compared to someone who is applying just as themselves, if you are applying as a whole family with like three dependents and a wife who is also working, you can imagine that the amount of document immigration needs to check is a lot more, and they are more likely to ask for additional documents. Once they ask for additional documents, the length of examination expands, and it can take a little bit longer depending on how quickly you can gather the necessary documents. Recommended method, there's really no best method, because everyone's situation is different. However, for those people who are eligible to apply as a highly skilled professional, that is the one we usually recommend, because if you fulfill the points requirement, it is less likely for immigration to look too far beyond the 1 year or the 3 year mark. It's not a guarantee, but it is more likely they might excuse a mistake here and there that happened a long time ago. If you have made mistakes in the past or you need to fix some mistakes, of course, by all means, try to do it as soon as possible. You can go to the ward office, the pension office, to double check your record and to do some back payments if necessary. They are allowing back payments for pension, and so if you haven't been enrolled and would like to pay back, then that is possible. Given that I only have a few more minutes left, I would just like to say thank you for all your attention, and to let you know that there is a lot of information available, and you are not alone in navigating quite a complex system. As an expat myself, I know how it feels to deal with language barriers and also to deal with the cultural differences. Simply writing your address in Japanese or getting documents redelivered by the post office can sometimes be anxiety-inducing. But with internet and with organizations who are becoming more and more bilingual, there are helps available. If you don't have to try to fix everything yourself, you can reach out, and by all means, feel welcome to reach out to Acroseed for immigration. This is a QR code to our website and our contact form in case you would like to send us a message or to ask for a free consultation. We do free consultations over the phone and also by email. And please feel welcome to just contact and discuss your situation. Okay, thank you very much.